Herbal Therapies and the Tradition School of Herbal Studies. And so we've got a variety of different practitioners here. We've got both a Western and a Chinese herbal program, as well as a that goes all the way from beginner through clinician, as well as a lot of standalone classes. A couple of interesting ones coming up that I'm going to mention really fast. Herbal First Aid is in June, on June 29th and 30th, and that's here in person. It's definitely better in person, but that is online live as well, and everybody gets the recording when they're done. I definitely have a lot of fun teaching that one, and probably a little bit different twist than some, since I used to be a CPR and first aid Red Cross instructor for many years. We've got our Thursday night series of both Ayurvedic medicine making classes, Ayurvedic medicine making, mushroom making classes, and some Chinese medicine foundational stuff, as well as our anatomy and physiology series. We've also got a special guest. Oops, I got to find the pieces of paper, and I'm going to kind of hold this up. It's topical Thai medicinal herbs, and so it's appropriate for massage therapists, yoga instructors, Thai massage, and it's from Bob Haddad. Hopefully I'm saying his name right. This is a ways out, but we are limiting the number of people in that class because it's so hands-on. And so I do recommend you sign up soon. We've already got like 5 people signed up, I think. It's October 5, 6, and and you can feel free to call the school for more info. There we go. Yay. And the Chinese program starts in November. We've already got, I think we've got like 3 people signed up super early. People are fired up. For any of you who are thinking about running away to acupuncture school, it's a nice prep school for folks who are like really don't know what they're getting into and want to do a little safe space. It's a nice way to check things out. I always say, if you're going to run away to acupuncture school, at least take the first 3 classes with me, and you'll have a really good head start into the first year of acupuncture school. I cram a lot of information into those first 3 classes. Certainly, I always encourage people to stay for the whole program, but it's a great start. And we're also one of the few programs that have an ongoing student intern clinic. So our senior students in both the Western and Chinese program, once a week, they're seeing clients coming in off the street and taking them through their entire wellness, going through their medical history, blood work, looking at their tongues and pulses, and using a diagnostic system to come up with customized formulas. So it's really kind of a unique thing that's been going on now for 20 years, which is frightening. For those of you who are interested in some of the other, we've got, I said, the first aid coming up very soon, the animal care class, and that one's always a fun one, September 28th and 29th. So I know we have people starting to register for that now, even though it's a million miles away. And we focus on dogs and cats, but we talk about as many other different critters as we're able to fit into that. If you're excited about learning more about the herbal community, learning lots of cool herb stuff, if you're not familiar with the American Herbalist Guild, I encourage you to check it out. It is online. It is open to everybody. You don't have to have a particular knowledge base to be a member of the American Herbalist Guild. Just joining gets you access to volumes of information, and it's also helping to support the profession. But their annual conference is coming up in Black Mountain, North Carolina, one of my favorite locations there, and it's October 4th through 7th, and I'm teaching, I don't actually remember what I'm teaching. I'm teaching some interesting class. It's I believe it's something like roadblocks to successful practice. So I'm going to look at some of the more obscure things that will screw up a perfectly good evaluation and herbal protocol, with an emphasis on food sensitivities. And if you're interested in the Chinese medicine and acupuncture realm, or you're an acupuncture physician already, even if you're in another state, I really encourage you to come for the Florida State Oriental Medicine Association conference that's in Orlando, Florida, coming up this August 16th through the 18th. And I'm teaching 2 classes there. One that I'm super excited about, I've not taught it before, and that is the diagnostics and treatment of the melanated patient. And by that I mean people of color. And one of the problems, both in the Chinese medicine, Western herbal medicine, and Western medicine, is it's mostly white people. Going all the way back to the Greeks when we talk about um, what does inflammation look like, and we see pain, loss of motion, swelling, and redness. And the problem is with people who have more melanin than me, it's not red on them. It'll actually get darker. And there's a range of subtleties based on how dark somebody's skin is that requires us to just kind of change the way we assess people so that we're more effective. Everything from some languaging, what does anemia look like on somebody with darker skin, and so forth, but also specific blood work that should be done, screenings that should be done at an earlier time. Vitamin D certainly be one of the big ones that we'll talk a great deal about during that conference. And then I'm also going to be looking at obscure food sensitivities that are sometimes hidden roadblocks to successful treatment in both Chinese and Western herbal medicine. And a number of our herbs that have things like gluten in them, that have latex, salicylates, there are nightshades. So there's a whole bunch of things that aren't talked about often enough in the acupuncture schools, the Chinese medicine programs, that really can cause some problems for folks. So, what didn't I mentioned student clinic. Also, if you can't stay for this whole open forum, you can find the recording and all the past recordings on Tradition School of Herbal Studies YouTube page. You'll also find there, and all the usual platforms, you'll also find the podcast I started a couple of months ago, getting ready to record a couple of new episodes of that. And really a couple of interesting ones. I talked about herbal safety in one. I talked about working with kids, and really great guests that I've had on there. Talked about mental health and herbal medicine. So there's really some interesting podcast stuff on there. And also, if you're in the Tampa Bay area or coming by to visit, we've got a plant nursery in the back as well as our teaching garden, where we have occasional events and things like that. If nothing else, well, it's a little hot to go out there and just sit and relax and have lunch. But as the weather cools off, I hope that now that we're here at 6340 Central Avenue in St. Pete, we've already got some patients who literally bring their lunch and before or after their treatments go out and just chill for a bit. All right. So where to start? It's always funny, it's like I usually start with some nice easy ones on all of this. And I don't think any of these questions for this evening are particularly easy. And so I'll totally cop out, and I'm going to say, like, if you have any questions, post them in the chat, and I will try to keep track of them as we go. If I don't kind of mention that I wrote it down, feel free to repost it or yell at me or something. I'm going to start with an easy one just to get my brain working here, because that does get challenging for my brain. What up, Natalie? Hey, you got to come by and visit. You haven't seen the school in ages. So one of my favorite herbs to talk about is Biden's Alba. So not the president, but the weed that grows throughout tropics and subtropical areas throughout the world, but here in Florida in particular, and going all the way, I think I've seen it all the way up into Georgia, certainly throughout the Caribbean. Biden's Alba, it's called beggar's tick, Spanish needle, a whole slew of different names for it. And I'm going to say it's literally one of my favorite herbs to talk about. And a lot of you, if you've been a student here, if you've been in Herb Walk with me, you've heard me tell my really basic story of I was at the teach-in, and this was probably 15 years ago or something. And I was at the teach-in, and this was long before COVID, obviously, and I went out and pulled a bunch of weeds from the school ground and handed them around to a bunch of third graders. And let's just say they were not courageous in their snacking on random weeds from the yard. And this one kid in the front row, the whole time he's like coughing, and everybody's apologizing for this kid, and don't worry, he's not contagious. This has been going on for weeks, and he's got an inhaler, he'll be fine. And so my 15 minutes of fame were up, and this kid was one of the only kids who ate any of the plants that I handed around. And I'm walking down the hallway, and the teacher comes running down the hall, and Bob, what'd you give to little Johnny? I'm like, crap, anaphylactic shock. Anybody can be allergic to anything. And I was like, why? And he's like, well, he stopped coughing. And I was like, I'm sure his meds just kicked in. And then a few weeks later, I get this letter, an actual handwritten letter, not an email, that said, thank you so much for curing me of my cough. And one of the ways that a lot of herbal knowledge is learned is through experience. And there's what the book says, there's what our teachers may have said. But the reality is no single one of us is the keeper of all the herbal knowledge. No book or tome out there has all the information. And what I always joke about is, like, you don't want to be friends with an herbalist, because the reality is, if I suspect that this herb might have a role in a cough, now I want to define its energetics. I want to define what type of cough it's ideally for. And so it's also a Chinese herb, Xian Feng Sao. I've done a couple of YouTube videos on the Spanish needle just because I love talking about it and have so many positive stories. Xian Feng Sao, and any of you who don't speak Chinese, this is a great way to find some additional information on it. Yeah, let me add that to the list. Who is that? Christina. There are many, and I will talk about that in a minute. Go to Cola. All right. And so I basically just started torturing all my friends and family and said, anybody who had a cough or a sniffle or anything, I was like, here, eat this weed. And what I discovered is that it's helpful for a variety of, you're fine. Take a papaya. Actually, this one's ripe. Yeah. The Biden's is good for pretty much any kind of cough, whether it's green, yellow, clear, white. But it's not magical. What it's magical for is for that lingering cough after a cold and flu with clear white phlegm, a teaspoon to a tablespoon, eaten fresh, or dried, but fresh is better, of the leaves. Will resolve that cough in usually less than 15 minutes. Single dose, doesn't come back. And that's crazy. There's not many herbs I can say that about. But what I oftentimes forget to mention is not only is it good for other types of cough, it seems to have an affinity for the lungs. It's a really powerful antimicrobial. There's so much research out there on this herb, and yet it's also considered just an edible vegetable. So we can throw that into a stir fry, into a smoothie. We can make a cup of tea. In southern China, in the summertime, it is literally used as a cooling tea and served in restaurants and cafes. But it's also recommended for chronic Lyme disease because of its really good antimicrobial properties. But one of the things, I swear I forget to mention this about 90% of the time, and luckily I remembered it the other day. I had a client of mine that had a UTI, and the antibiotics were not doing a good job. And so I was like, hey, use some Biden's. And so it is a well-known herb for urinary tract infections. And I like it, not only, it's probably not a heavy enough hitter to knock out a UTI, especially if it's gotten a little out of control or you're starting to get a fever and things like that. But what I love it for, and whenever I can remember to recommend it, one of the things we see is certainly UTIs, urinary tract infections, are more common in women than men, but men can get them as well. But they're very common in the elderly. And so as people age, the nerve sensations that we normally associate things like frequent urination and burning with a urinary tract infection. Well, if you're 85 and had 5 kids, chances are you have frequent urination anyway. Probably a guy who's got it for different reasons, but he's got frequent urination. And because the nerve sensations are so diminished, they won't actually notice that they have a UTI. And what will oftentimes be the very first symptom that their caretakers may notice or family members is they'll see a change in memory and mental status, where all of a sudden, like one day they seem sharp as a tack and cranking out the crossword puzzles and rattling off everything, and then literally they'll wake up the next day and they don't remember who you are. The very first thing when it's that acute of a shift in the mental status, assume that it's a UTI and get that person some antibiotics. The Bidens, the Spanish needle, is phenomenal more for prevention because it is a vegetable. That can be part of a daily regimen for somebody who is at higher risk. So somebody who's catheterizing, who has a history of frequent urinary tract infections. It's one of those things where I've used it for kids as young as 2 years old, where I did make it as a tea and it worked like a champ. I've not used it on younger because I haven't had the opportunity. I would happily give that to a 6-month-old and not think twice about it. What up? What up, Raven's dad? Please, for those of you in the South, but you can get this as a tincture, you can get this as a dried herb and have this just in your house. This is like, sure, you can buy it. Don't worry, I didn't cover any of yours yet. But this is one of those things in the South that it's growing in your yard. And so it's growing under a hedge. It's literally a weed growing out of the cracks of your sidewalks. So make sure you harvest this one from a non-sprayed place, or my classic advice is always harvest higher than a dog's leg. If you want the Spanish needle for food, start to recognize it before it goes into bloom, and it will have a better flavor. If you want better medicine, wait till it gets into bloom and it's an older plant, it's more bitter. And that makes for better medicine. And just know that it has just really good positive benefits for a range of stuff, but has an affinity to the lungs and an affinity to the urinary tract system, but is safe as a vegetable, and a range of other benefits that you can do a ton of research on. All right, that was my easy one. Let's go for a hard one. That one was more Western. Let's do a Chinesey one. So another herbalist in the community asked me about an herb that is less famous than it used to be, but it is definitely a famous herb. Most people call it He Shou Wu. Let me type that in. Shou Wu. But some people know it by its alternate name, FoTi. There's a whole saga around the whole FoTi term. It was some multi-level marketers out of Hawaii, I believe, who tried to corner the market on this when ginseng became big in like the late 60s, early 70s. They were looking for a cheap thing. You're very welcome. A cheap thing to kind of get it going. And so they stumbled across this polygonum called He Shou Wu. And the name He Shou Wu is a little bit of its folklore story. This is, it translates loosely as Mr. He's black hair. Wu is black. The folklore is about I think it was He Tian, I forget his other name, and show his head. So it was like his black head of hair from eating this herb. And the rough story is that he was kind of dilapidated. He was like early graying hair. His teeth were falling out. He couldn't father any children. And it kind of took to drinking, so impotence was there. And finally one night, him and his wife got in a fight, and she threw him out of the house. He was drunk, he passes out, and he wakes up and he sees these vines intertwined in front of him, and he had a vision to dig these plants up and process them and make a tea. And so he went into a cave with his bundle of He Shou Wu, and he came out, 6 months later, and now his gray hair was black, and he was vibrant and standing up straight, and his teeth were solid. He could tear into, crack bones with his teeth, and came out and got a new wife and fathered many children, and even his children lived a long, healthy life. And he lived to be, some people say 130, some people say 160 years old. Um, and so I will not promise you that you'll live forever if you eat this herb, but it's known as a essence or Jing tonic. It's great for the blood. There's two parts of this plant that are used actually. The root is the He Shou Wu, and ideally a minimum of a 4-year root. Hey, pickles, a 4-year root, but some people say even a 6 or 7-year-old root is better. But there's another part, the stem. Oops, helps if I know how to type. Jiao Teng, Jiao Teng, which is the stems of the He Shou Wu. And that's actually even more commonly used than the He Shou Wu is. So one of the things, I grew this plant many years ago, and I was like, oh, it's a pretty vine. And I stuck it in the ground next to my house and figured it would crawl up this little trellis. And 3 years later, it had climbing up on my roof, enveloping my house. Oh, that's interesting. So oddly enough, not a topical. It's more of an internal herb to help the hair. I'll get to that, Lee. Um, and so it was very challenging. It took me over a year to get that plant out of my yard because it was such a bully. So if you do grow this, and it's very easy to grow, it is a climbing vine, and I would keep it away from your house and power lines. But ideally, I would actually put that in a large pot and make sure that you have the pot on concrete so it can't break out of the bottom and spread, because it will spread. Um, and it can handle full sun here in Florida. Like literally, we have it just in sand, not in a pot, but it's pretty easy to contain where we are. Um, so one of the things I found whilst pulling this out is that it does have an irritating latex in it. And so it does need to be processed. This is not one you want to make a stir fry out of. And I would say not even making a tea out of it, a tisane is appropriate. The roots should be dried and boiled or simmered with black soybeans, and that's different from black beans. It's actually a black soybean. You can find them in your Asian markets pretty easily, or find them online. There's many interesting reasons why the black one's better. It's the kidney health, and kidney for us relates to the jing or the essence of someone. But the boiling it with or simmering it with the soybeans seems to get rid of some of the more irritating alkaloids in there that can cause some liver issues. And ideally, you do it a minimum of 4 hours. You can do up to 3 days, but 4 hours minimum with a water change, and then reboil it again, and then drying it, and then it's ready. So it's a total of 8-hour minimum boiling with the black soybeans in a 1 to 10 ratio. So it would be 1 part soybeans to 10 parts He Shou Wu root, and then dried thoroughly, and then you can grind it or slice it or whatever you want to do. The Yi Jiao Teng, the stems of it can be processed, and probably better that way, but it's not necessary to process the stems of it. And so you just want to simmer that for a minimum of an hour. But the functions of the stem versus the roots are different. So the root is used as a longevity, fertility, aphrodisiac for both men and women. Both a anemia, as well as the concept of yin deficiency in Chinese medicine is a hot deficient syndrome, where you don't have enough cooling, moistening liquids. Not enough. It's not about water. It's about literally this substance we call yin that's moistening and cooling. So like when we see menopause, where people are hot flashing, we say that's a type of yin deficiency, and so He Shou Wu is used for that sometimes. But here's where it gets interesting. Many years ago, when my mom was still alive, She had a breast cancer scare, and I yell at my students all the time, don't treat family. And so even though obviously I care very much for my mom, I knew I was not the best practitioner for her because I didn't want to be a nag to my mom. And so she went to see one of the other practitioners in the clinic who I had a great deal of respect for. And somehow she talked my mother into doing raw herbs. So she was putting this like 15 herb decoction together. My mom was boiling it up every 2 days. And one of the herbs in there was He Shou Wu. And 6 months later, and so she stayed on this formula for 6 months with some minor modifications, but always had the He Shou Wu in there. She's in getting with her hairstylist, and her hairstylist goes, Shirley, that's really weird. You have black roots coming in. And so literally it started at about 75 at that time. My mom's hair was all white. All of a sudden she started to get black roots coming in. So this isn't about dyeing your hair. This is changing the terrain inside your body. And I forget the name of the cool chemical that makes your hair turn gray or black and so forth. But it was literally changing that in her body. I will say I'll put some cautions with the He Shou Wu in particular, and then I'll talk about the Jiao Teng. I don't recommend doing an alcohol extraction, a tincture with the He Shou Wu. There was a number of reports, and it's been a number of years. Shou Wu Jin. There was a product made in China called Shou Wu Jin that was sold in a lot of the Asian markets and things like that. And at least in China, they were starting to show up probably 10 years ago. Maybe it was longer than that. I'm a bad judge of time, in case you don't know me. That it was causing some elevated liver enzymes and a few cases of liver failure. And it was tied back to this Shou Wu Jin. And the question then is it something that's being extracted by the alcohol different from a water extraction, the more classical use of it, that's bringing too high a concentration of an alkaloid? Or was that some really shady wood alcohol that shouldn't have been used in that, which, there's some questionable stuff that happens in China and in any number of different products. So was it the alcohol itself was the problem, not the He Shou Wu? And we don't know. I haven't done any research in the last year or so, but the last time I heard, they weren't sure why there was that. So I just generically discourage alcohol extractions of He Shou Wu. It also is hard on the digestion, so I usually suggest taking it with food if you have a sensitive stomach. I mean, it's not a better or worse. It's just like, nope, you don't want a bunch of bloating and nausea. It's for people who have a lot of phlegm. So if you tend towards loose stools, lots of phlegminess, chronic sinusitis, there's always undigested food, He Shou Wu may not be the right herb for you. But if you tend towards constipation, really dry, it's a good choice. So taking it for a long term without taking any breaks can lead to loose stools or phlegm. So kind of use your, if you're getting bloating, if you're getting loose stools, getting really phlegmy for no obvious reason, it's the He Shou Wu. And then just take a break from it, maybe cut back on your dosage. It is considered a long-term use herb, and it's made specifically, I'm going to say, probably, you can certainly do it at any age, but it's one of those things as you start to feel aging starting to ding you a little bit, you're feeling more fatigued, deficient, the gray hairs are starting to come in, then it's an appropriate herb. It's also one of the few Chinese herbs that we use as a single, although it is used in many classical formulas. This one's super appropriate to take by itself, and you can either add that into a rice gruel, a congee, a decoction, or even a capsule is fine. So it's generally considered very safe, but those few minor cautions with it, watching the digestion and not with booze. The other part, the stem, the Jiao Teng, is actually better for menopause symptoms. It is specific for night sweats and hot flashes. So it's a little bit milder. You're not going to see the dramatic effect on things like your hair and so forth, but a little gentler on the belly, a little bit wider range. We're still looking for some overall deficiency and dryness with it. Certainly common with menopause, and we're not limited to menopause to have night sweats and hot flashes. Guys can get it. You can get it at any age. It's more about an imbalance than anything else. But the other nice thing about the Jiao tongue, it also calms the Shen, and the Shen is kind of your mental emotional health. So for people with anxiety, hot flashes, night sweats, this is a really good choice as an herb. It's gentle, it's not a sedative, so it's more about kind of making you feel more grounded and anchored. So for people who all of a sudden anxiety is kicking up, I always use the menopause. Anxiety is kicking up during menopause, maybe some low, some moderate hypertension where it's like 140 over 90, it would be a good choice. If you're restless sleeping, you're waking up because the cat walked across the floor or something, the Jiao tongue is a good choice. So fun one to grow. The root's kind of a pain in the butt to process. You're not required to do it, but I honestly recommend some processing of it, whether you use at least boil it longer than you would. But the black soybeans are definitely a better choice to add with that. All right. Dawn, I think I got you on that one. Hopefully you're on. I don't know whether you made it in there or not, but you can hear it in the recording. Yeah. Oh boy, that one's. I'm going to do another easy one. Sorry, that one was a long one. I was asked about DMSO, and so dimethyl sulfoxide, I think, is what that is. It's starting to show up more and more in the herbal realm, and I don't use it a lot. I'm familiar with it. I remember when I first started to get into this in the 70s, that was actually all the rage for a little while. It is a byproduct of paper mills, which we know those are beacons of health and care for our environment. So it is a byproduct of that. That was tongue in cheek for those of you who didn't catch that. But it was originally used for veterinary medicine, specifically for the arthritis with aging racehorses. So it was a topical liniment that was added on, and it had a really interesting property in that it would instantly absorb through the skin, get into the bloodstream, and the big caution was whatever you had on your skin, it would carry that through your skin. So if I put deodorant on, and I don't know why I would slap it on my armpit, but I threw some DMSO in my armpit, I would bring all of those chemicals into my bloodstream. My running joke is if I ever decided to take up a heroin addict because I'm frightened of needles, I'll just mix some DMSO with my heroin and rub it on my veins and get all the benefits without the collapsing veins. Just kidding. So it's a fascinating thing. Like you can find it at most of your health food stores, and it should be food grade or veterinary grade, 99.9% pure, it usually says on there. I got to read this one. For someone that does not have many stressors, or not sleeping, falling asleep, but waking midnight. All right, I'm going to come back to that one. All right, cool. So the DMSO, if you take a Q-tip, dip it in this liquid of DMSO and rub that on your big toe, you will taste the sulfur in your mouth usually within 1 minute. And so this sulfur is going immediately into the bloodstream and circulating into every corner of your body and having a significant effect. Kind of that here for the reclaimed water, if you ever smelled the sulfur water here, that rotten egg kind of smell. If you've ever smelled your broccoli water, or my favorite invasive vine here called, I call it fart vine, everybody else calls it stink vine. Very high in sulfur compounds, and we need sulfur. Like it is one of, like, everybody talks about magnesium is a very common deficiency, and it is. So is sulfur, because the sulfur compounds in our vegetables, and that's where we get most of our sulfur from, start breaking down the second we pull that plant out of the ground. And since most of our food is not freshly picked within 24 hours, but shipped from far reaches of the earth, there's frequently very little sulfur in there. And so you can, oops, it's funny, I hadn't used this product in a while, but I just like, you know what, I haven't been playing with sulfur compounds in a while, so I just ordered that for myself. Ooh, that one's not open yet. Just to work on immune system and connective tissue stuff and all of that. So DMSO is a topical liniment, a little creepy. Make sure you don't have anything on your skin. I don't use it a lot and I don't recommend it. I've used it for myself 5 times over the years for some knee pain from injuries. I find the taste challenging, and not by drinking it, by rubbing it on, but you taste it for a good 30 to 40 minutes afterwards. I am seeing an increased use of it, both internally and externally, especially in functional medicine. There's a local clinic that I believe is mixing it with chemotherapy, and I'd heard about a case of bladder cancer where they put the chemo in low dose in with the DMSO and infused it, catheterized and washed the bladder with it to good success, I'm happy to say, or at least that was what was reported to me. And I'm hearing about people doing tinctures with DMSO. And I don't know anything about that. I would be hesitant only because my chemistry is not good enough to see how the dimethyl sulfoxide works with all the alkaloids in a plant. I just literally don't know. So if any of you know more, I would love for you to email me or show me some links to some research. And I have not been in a one-on-one with anybody who's making those products. I'm not familiar with any of them being sold. So topically, sure. If you had some serious health issues where there was a kidney and liver were compromised or dysfunctional, I would be hesitant. And I say that not because I know of an issue, but I don't know how DMSO is excreted out of the body and what effect it might have. So that would just be a general caution with DMSO. It is very entertaining, though, to put that on your toe and see how long it takes you to taste it. If you're really bored someday, it's great fun with children, No, don't do that. How am I doing on time? I'm doing good on time. All right. DMSO, you're gone. You're gone. And you're gone. All right. Let me do another easy one. Just fleas and cats. Fleas are a pain. They're a bigger pain. Oh, wait, people are saying stuff about DMSO. I got to read these real fast. Heard a lot about DMSO. Talk from Amanda Vollmer. Okay. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, and I don't personally know Amanda. Yeah, I just, there's probably so much you can do. I just don't know. Oh, hey, Patricia. I haven't been to Adam in a while. I've been there for FOSOMA conferences, I think, I think that's when I was down there. I would love to see some good research, both on its safety, doing IV, but also how is that excreted out of the body? I literally just don't know. And actually, you know what? I'm going to write Amanda Vollmer's, because she may have some good information. I'm going to have to check her out, give her an email, and see what the dealio is. And I see it mentioned periodically in some of the professional herbalists, and just nobody seems to have a good answer on it. So it'll be interesting to see. Cats and fleas. So especially here in, I mean everywhere, but at least in, oh yes, that's when I was there last. Duh. I was in Fort Lauderdale teaching. The frost at least knocks the fleas back a little bit in the outside, but because we don't get frosts here very often in Florida anymore, it's really gets challenging as the temperatures get warmer. Our soil around here seems to breed fleas, and so if you have an indoor-outdoor cat, it's going to get them. It's going to bring some back, and that can be a cruel torture for any animal or human. Um, and it's a challenge because the flea stuff, the drops that you put on every month, are a neurotoxin. And if you do a little Google search on that, it does not have a great safety record. And so it's really challenging to use some of the chemical flea stuff. I can't think of the names of any of them at the moment. Um, some animals, especially your smaller animals, some are more sensitive than others, and so watching for any kind of nervous system, neurological changes on your critters. Also, I would wear gloves if I was putting that on my pet. And there, you'll notice that the flea stuff has weight ranges, both dogs and cats. And so you always want to do the lowest possible range. So if you're, I don't remember what they are, let's say the range is 15 to 25 and you're, okay, I'm thinking dogs, your dog's at 20 pounds, I would actually go the next smaller dosage. I would do the 10 to 15 or the 5 to 15 and see if that's sufficient. Uh, Baibu. Huh. I believe Baibu is the Chinese long pepper, isn't it? Is that? I won't swear to that. That's really funny. Um, so I understand trying to avoid that. Certainly, get rid of the carpeting and treating the outside and so forth. I've seen a million of those, like put cinnamon down, put oregano, rosemary. Like I've never seen any of that work. Nothing wrong with doing them. They're not harmful. That's great. The one thing that can be effective is the diatomaceous earth, DE, making sure you get a food grade one. Don't use the stuff for your swimming pool. That is carcinogenic. If you're using it, I don't care if it is food grade, please wear a mask. Don't let kids doing it. Um, but putting it doesn't do any good internally. All it is, the diatoms are fossilized little microscopic plankton, and they have sharp edges. And so the exoskeleton of fleas and a lot of other critters will literally, if they walk through a pile of DE, it will do little micro tears and it will cause them to dehydrate. Um, so putting that in the bedding, you can even put it on their skin as a topical treatment. Um, it is, I wouldn't feed them spoonfuls of it, but it is safe if they lick it off, so it's not toxic. It is just a little hard on the digestion. Um, Put it in their bedding, put it where they like to go, put it around the entrance of your house, anywhere that fleas might get in. Um, what up, Stephanie? um, and that will help. Using a flea comb to get the eggs out, and that can be helpful if you're like, your critter's suffering, I got to use the flea drops. And like, there's no shame in doing that. Like, we all do the very best we can. Um, you may not have to do it every month. If you use it and then religiously use a flea comb to get the eggs out, and make sure you're dropping that flea comb in vinegar or bleach, something to kill those eggs so that you don't just brush them out into the carpet. Uh, nice. Um, the That can really make a difference. I found in my yard, I don't use chemicals on my yard, obviously, and the people before, well, I'm going to have to go back 2 houses, or 1 house ago. The people before me did use chemicals, and there's a lot of dogs in the neighborhood, a lot of cats wandering in the neighborhood. And so when I stopped spraying, it took 3 years. And I find that 3 to 5 years for your yard to get naturalized, for the diversity of critters to come in that will keep a flea population under control. Where it gets challenging is that if your neighbors are not doing all the right things, those fleas are going to jump right over into your yard. So, if you're lucky enough to have neighbors that are more naturally minded, have more wild yards, not just the monocrop of St. Augustine grass, it's probably easier to get things under control. I don't like widespread application of DE in my yard because it's not just killing the unhelpful things. It's not just killing one thing. It's going to kill any insect with an exoskeleton. So I generally keep it very close to the entrance, where I'm walking a pet, things like that, just to try to keep the amounts down. I wish I had better answers than that, and there's certainly, you know, I find washing animals frequently is a blessing and a curse. They're not meant to be washed every week, kind of thing. Using if you're trying to not use caustic soaps and things like that, if you get a plant with saponins, yucca, Y-U-C-C-A, not yucca as in let's make some potatoes. The Spanish bayonet yucca, the root of that is very high in saponins, but anything with saponins will work. That can be combined with very strongly aromatic plants. That could be anything from mint to chaparral. Those are the biggies that I tend to use. And then washing your animal with that. Insects don't do well with saponins. That tends to be a little rough. You could also use things like, wormwood and so forth, but I find those don't work as well as a stronger aromatic. So find the stronger aromatics that you can find. And the flea combs really go a long way. The problem is, as soon as you get them close to under control, you stop using them. Remember to treat bedding, wash bedding frequently, replace your DE frequently, vacuuming and changing your vacuum bags regularly or however it's stored, because like even hardwood floors, they get in the cracks, the eggs and the fleas go and hide in all those places. So fleas are a pain. Sorry, I wish I had better answers for flea stuff. All right. I'm doing good on time. I'm going to kind of do a skim read on this next one. Public health, I don't know about that, Lee. Public health ombudsman, I can. Vet promise. I'm not familiar with that. I'm always cautious. There are some really good insect flea sprays out there for humans and animals. They frequently do use extracted alkaloids from plants that start to be very chemical-like and are frequently can be neurotoxic as well, not to the level of some of the flea stuff. But do be cautious with that. Some of the extracted plant things are challenging in their own right. So especially on your smaller animals, they do work, but do your homework on all your ingredients when it's anything other than just a plant in some oil or glycerin. And there's lots of interesting things. There was something somebody showed up with in the school camping trip. It was just a soundy, and not one we could hear, that was supposed to be a tick repellent. I have no idea if it works, so none of us got any ticks. So there's all kinds of new gadgets that are coming out all the time. So I'm going to read through this one just because it's such a classic story for herbalists. We tend to not treat a lot of colds and flu. The reality is people come to us as the last resort, and so they've been to 5 doctors and 3 specialists in the Mayo Clinic and $3,000 worth of blood tests and la la la, and then they want to know what herb can cure them without an actual consult, in which case I punch them. No, I'm just kidding. And so kind of this story is kind of normal for what we see as herbalists. So I'm going to read, I may do a little synopsis here. 6 weeks ago, my husband got sick, nothing major, low-grade fever, stuffy sinuses, eyes turned a little red. Or no, after then 3 days later, his eyes turned bright red. He panicked, went right to the doctor, diagnosed with conjunctivitis. Got eye drops. Next 2 days, vision became cloudy, so we went to the eye doc. All appropriate things to do. She thought she needed, because of that, the eye doc said, you need to go to the ER right away. We did, because his blood pressure was high and eye pressure was also up. After 8 hours, thinking he had a stroke, but luckily was not having a stroke. They let him out of the ER, but still didn't have a diagnosis. Nobody had any idea. So the classic, here's a steroid because we don't know what else to do. Ordered lots of blood work, autoimmune markers, probably an ANA. Now a week later, the eyes have gotten worse, more eye drops, now a 4 milligram oral steroid. Another 4 days later, major vision issues, bright flashes, light sensitivity, extreme swelling. 3 days after this, we went to a retina specialist, blah, 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 blood work. Higher dose of steroids, now up to 50 milligrams. Scheduled a 2-week follow-up to hear blood work results, as well as genetic testing. Holy crap. Ridiculous bills, stress. Oh my God, are we going blind? Was diagnosed with MEWDS, which is multiple evanescent white dot syndrome. Believe it or not, there is a complex of white dot syndrome diseases, which is just crazy. I am like, I think I've heard of this before. It's a one-time acute happening, result of a virus or chronic, blah, blah, blah. And it happens again, go back on steroids until it flares up. I personally found the whole experience ridiculous, degrading, and offering nothing. That all sounds correct. Just giving them goji berries, bilberry, blueberry, chrysanthemum teas, tinctures, eating gojis and blueberries. And then this is the best part, especially since all the doctors told me there was no way it had anything to do with having a cold, zero coincidence. And so the steroids, of course, have trashed him, and he's still on them for a few more weeks before he can dose off of them. So I'm certainly not an expert in white dot disease. I did do a 2-week training course on eye stuff, and honestly, that wasn't mentioned. But a quick little bit of research, I think it was at the Mayo Clinic, I was reading it, I don't really remember, that it's usually caused by a viral, comes with an acute viral infection. So stupid head doctors don't know what the hell they're talking about. And, you know, when I always take a variety of different ways. And my background, I was a Western herbalist before I ran away to acupuncture school and became a Chinese herbalist. I grew up in the Bahamas and learned a lot of the tropical Caribbean medicine as a teenager with an old boodle down there. Studied Western herbal medicine mostly on my own for many years. Learned a lot of the Northeast plants and then a lot of the European plants when I was over there. But sometimes the Chinese medicine is so specific with their diagnostics that I prefer, in some cases, and in a case like this, I would probably go more Chinese. And there's a couple of different ways to think about it. And this is where it gets interesting. And one of the mistakes, oops, I missed something here. All of this came across info on pearl powder for eye health. I probably would not do the pearl powder. I'm going to have to check that book out. So the nice thing about Chinese medicine is it has a diagnostic system outside of the Western medical construct. And where a lot of acupuncturists and herbalists, we get into trouble is when we go, this is the formula for an insert medical disease here. Or for that matter, this acupuncture point is good for medical condition here. That's kind of the cookbook acupuncture herbal medicine. is not impressive. That's kind of the lowest level of herbal care. And so, what did we do before we had blood work and MDs and retina specialists and all of that? The diseases were always there. And so they had to have a different way of evaluating. And that's one of the really sweet things is this very tight diagnostic system of Chinese medicine. And so there's some things that when we say a particular organ, we don't mean the real organ, we mean the cool Chinese energetic organ and all the things we associate with it. And so when we think about eyes and just the generic eye, not breaking it down into the subparts of the eye, the eye and the vision we associate with the liver. And when we look at the liver, there's many things that can be the real liver, but also the energetic idea of the liver. And so things like stress, certainly chemicals, all affect it. And there's different things that can travel through the body to disrupt or affect the liver. And so the fact that we see this come on in this particular case, and it's always important to take each case in its own merit, but also when we look historically, that it frequently comes with some kind of microbial thing. So whether it's bacterial or virus or whatever, this one sounded viral. There is a type of disease when we're attacked from outside, i.e. Virus, bacteria kind of thing. And if we don't treat it correctly or it goes deeper into the body, it can get trapped or attack other parts of our body. And so there is what we say is half interior, half exterior. Frequently gets trapped in the liver per se, and doesn't always, actually it usually doesn't, but in this case I believe it does, then affect the eye. And that's very different when we look at, the person who submitted this rattled off a couple of herbs. Those were all good choices. All of those herbs are beneficial for the eyes, anti-inflammatory, nourishing, and also in the case of goji berries and chrysanthemum, guides to the eyes. But in this case, I think we're probably looking at something that's attacked and needs to be expressed properly. And of course, when we look at steroids are great. He probably can see a little bit better while he's on the steroids. He doesn't have the symptoms. If you're lucky, he's getting the house clean because he has too much energy now. But the reality is they suppress the immune system. So the immune system is not capable of pushing out this invasion from the exterior. And so without tongue and pulse and all the good stuff, it's hard to say. But there's a classic formula that we use for things that get trapped from outside and going in. Where's my acupuncture folks? We should make you guys put it in there. Shao Chai Hu Tong is the classic half interior, half exterior formula, and you could add to that, in particular, the chrysanthemum, which in Chinese is Juhua, to help guide that formula to the eye. And it's also the idea of releasing the exterior. So in Western herbal medicine, we talk about diaphoretic herbs that make you break a sweat. And that's what we use for colds and flu. And so things like elderflower, yarrow flowers, chamomile, lots of our flowers and aerial parts are great stuff to make you break a sweat. The Chinese have a similar, and actually every traditional culture has some similar ideas to this, that they believe that you are invaded from an exterior influence. And so the Chinese called it xie qi, evil qi. And so that idea that an evil pathogen comes through our skin pores, what we call the ghost gates, and gets trapped. And so if we sweat, we open up those skin pores and we flush out that evil, and we feel better. And we also say, the fever broke, right? So somebody else gets a big sweat. That's the diaphoretic herbs in Chinese medicine, the release exterior. And it tends to attack in the upper part of our body, in the head, neck, and upper shoulders. So the Shao Chai Hu Tong releases the shoulders and expresses this trapped pathogen. Juhua, the chrysanthemum flower, is also for an invasion of wind and guides to the eyes. Um, so it is very appropriate, nothing wrong with adding other things based on symptoms, but probably something like that very short term. Should you do it while he's taking prednisone or other meds? That's iffier. It's probably not a big deal. What may happen is the he's on 50 milligrams of prednisone right now, and as that starts to dose down, and we see this frequently, is what happens is you get down to that last 5 or 10 milligrams of prednisone, and all of a sudden, whatever the symptom was that it was suppressing just comes right back. And that's a problem because then they just crank you back up to 50. Maybe they put you up to 100 this time. And there's all kinds of fun side effects from immunosuppressants like that. So I don't even have a good opinion. Do you give him Shao Chai Hu Tong now? Do you wait till he gets off the prednisone and see if it just went away on its own? Because very likely it just goes away on its own at some point, you know? Keep him hydrated, blah, blah, blah. But there's something that you can use in order to dose down off of that last, that stepping down, going back down 5 milligrams of prednisone, depends on how many days. But usually you get into trouble in that 5 or 10 milligram range. And so you can just use licorice, and Western or Chinese. The Chinese licorice is cooler. The Western licorice is warmer. Both are moistening. There is certainly concern with doing high dose or long-term licorice, throwing off potassium balances through the kidney. So you have to watch blood pressure, and just do it short term and just use actual licorice. Good. Nothing wrong with going to the docs and make sure it isn't something scarier. The So there's a Chinese formula that I like. This comes as a pre-made pill, Xiaoyao Gansao Tong, and it's a classic formula. It's in the textbooks. It only has 2 herbs. It's white peony and licorice, and so Bai Xiaoyao, those first 2 herbs, it's just Xiaoyao is white peony, Gansao is Chinese for licorice, Tong just means formula. And so I use this starting at about the 10 milligrams, and I'll do about a half bottle dosage, increasing as you go down off your last one. This helps, the licorice specifically helps to extend the half-life of the steroid, keeping it in the body longer and allowing for a more gentle letting down off those last dosages. And frequently people have more success with a slower stepping down off of the stuff. And it's one of those things I always talk about. Everybody gets fearful of the dangerous herb-drug interactions, which are a concern, but nobody talks about the really good herb-drug interactions. So that's a positive herb-drug interaction, using the licorice and prednisone to more gently come off by extending the half-life. For something more toxic, it would be bad to extend the half-life. So we have to be careful with those things. The more important question might be, how do we prevent that from happening in the future? And that is by strengthening the exterior, i.e. working on his immune system, getting his vitamin D levels checked. And then the crazy talk is looking at exposure to breezes. And, the idea of it's hot out right now, in case anybody here in Florida didn't notice that. And so we all got fans going and air conditioner, and it's blowing on our face because we're running hot. It's literally like, I got in the car the other day, it was like 108 degrees in my car. It's just like, that's horrifying. And we've had 95 like actual temperatures here the last few days. So protecting in particular our upper body from those breezes, i.e. don't blow a fan on our face, neck, or upper shoulders. I know that's crazy talk. making sure the AC vents when you're in bed are not blowing on the face, neck, or shoulders. Keeping a shirt on, like if yay, I'm gonna go swimming, it's nice out. Quickly cover up that part of the body as quickly as possible. It's a crazy concept, and I've seen it play out time and time again. So you wouldn't want to, Leah, that's a great question. You don't want to slow down the half-life of chemotherapy. We want to, the chemo that's being given for cancer care, the doctors have a formula, for lack of a better name, of they can make an assumption of how fast or how slow it's processed out of the body, how it's eliminated through intestines, kidneys, liver, and so forth. And so to change that, actually, if we speed it up, then the chemo doesn't have a chance to do its work, in which case we're going through that for nothing. If we slow it down, it is a poison, and so we might actually hurt the host. That's the human. And so you don't want to screw with chemo at all. We want it to be in there just the right amount of time, rather than changing its excretion rate. So that's one that you're like, nope, if you're going to do chemo, do it the way the docs say to do it. And generically, I'll say, and this is a horrible oversimplification. You can, spend the rest of your life looking at P450, blah, 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 CYP, this and that. Bitter herbs speed up the processing of things. Sour herbs slow down the excretion and breakdown of things. So generally, when we're going through what's called narrow therapeutic margin medications, chemotherapy being one of those, we don't do very bitter or very sour herbs because they are likely to change the excretion rate. That's just a good generic way to say it. And I'll tell you what, that is literally how I practice, and it's kept me in good stead so far that I've not run into some of the scary problems that we read about sometimes. All right. Well, that was a big one. Jeez. And it's funny, there's lots of other things that can be looked at. I actually know the human that she posted about. There are, no, that was part of that question too. Sometimes after steroids in particular, like, yay, we successfully navigated that, and but a lot of times people are exhausted and will end up with night sweats, hot flashes, dry skin, easy bruising, overheating very easily after a long, hard, like 50 milligrams. That's a lot of freaking steroids. So one of the formulas that we frequently use is for yin deficiency. We commonly see that. And so the classic yin deficiency formula is Lu Wei Di Huang, one. And that's sometimes called Romania 6, and there's a million variations of that particular formula, which is fine. But if we were to specifically address that liver yin deficiency, kidney and liver yin deficiency, but affecting the eyes, there are two variations of that. Mingmu Di Huang Wan and Chi Ju. Learn to spell Chi Ju. I think I spelled that right. Di Huang Wan. Yeah, I'm pretty close. Oops. Stop trying to autocorrect me there. So the Mingmu Di Huang Wan and Qiju Di Huang Wan are the two classic liver yin deficiency formulas affecting the eyes. Most of the time people use Mingmu. The Qiju is better if you have red itchy eyes with yin deficiency. So two very different, actually three different ways to approach eye stuff. And there's other things that you could do if there was more phlegm and so forth that would be eye specific. So it's always interesting, the idea of the energetic diagnostics leading the formulation choices, the recommendations, and so forth, it really does become paramount. And whether we're doing Western or Chinese herbs, it always comes down to don't treat the disease, treat the person and the imbalances within that person. And too often that's lip service is given to that instead of like for real doing that. All right, I'm going to do a quick pause. I still got a couple more questions here. But in case you're just joining us, I know I'm watching the numbers go all up and down and crazy. In case you don't know it, I'm Bob Linde. I'm an acupuncture physician and a registered herbalist. And I'm the owner of Acupuncture and Herbal Therapies, as well as the Tradition School of Herbal Studies. And we've got a multi-practitioner. We've got 4 acupuncture physicians here, all great herbalists, all trained under me. I think 3 herbalists who've all trained underneath me that have different skill sets. Plus, we've got both the Western and Chinese herbal programs from beginner all the way through clinician. Both programs spend at least a year in weekly clinical practice, seeing clients under the supervision of me or one of the other senior practitioners. As well as the school, we've got lots of cool standalone classes in Ayurvedic, medicine making, anatomy and physiology for the herbalist. We've also got a full apothecary here with well over 800 herbs from around the world, including some of our Florida bioregional plants that I grow myself and harvest. We've also got a plant nursery that Florida natives and lots of not Florida natives, a lot of both Chinese and Western herbal medicine, herbs that we have out there growing, as well as probably now close to 200 herbs in our teaching garden here, half-acre teaching garden here in Florida. So if you're interested in growing some of these yourselves, come by. There's usually somebody here Wednesday through Sunday to get your herbs from. And also be sure to check if you can't stay for all of this or you missed some of it. I will upload this to our YouTube channel for the Tradition School of Herbal Studies, as well as on there you can find our podcast, Mastering Herbalism with Bob Linde, me. And you can hear the last couple of years. I've been doing this pretty steadily. I slowed down a little bit on doing these. And we've got a really cool class. We got a guest speaker, Bob Haddad, coming in October. This class will fill up, I'm quite sure. So get signed up soon on Thai medicinal herbs. So it's topical application of herbs mostly. And herb bundles, so it's appropriate for massage therapists, herbalists, yoga instructors, and other cool folks. And hopefully I'll see some of you at the acupuncture conference in Orlando in August 16th through the 18th. I'm teaching 2 classes, one that I'm super excited about on treating and diagnosis and treatment of melanated patients, and looking at how darker skin changes what heat looks like, what blood deficiency or anemia looks like, and also some of the testing that we should be requesting specific for them, either at specific ages or with greater emphasis to ensure that we're doing the best care for a huge segment of our population that has been neglected by all of the medical care over the years. Yeah, I don't know. I think that was all the goodies. All right, what do we got here? Let's see here. Is there any success with stage 4 cancer with herbs? All right, let me see. I feel like I missed something else. All right, I did that one. Let me talk cancer for a second, just because that has, the last few years, that's become the mainstay of my practice, for better or worse. And what I think is important, very often alternative health practitioners, and I won't single out herbalists, it is across the board in our realm, that we tend to take a very poor view of chemotherapy and mainstream dominant medicine care for cancer. And part of that is because sometimes the oncologists are very detached, and they don't put enough emphasis on things like food and diet, which obviously has a huge impact on, I think, the success and failure or the grace in which somebody goes through cancer treatment. But I would say that most of us, our image in our head when we think like chemotherapy and cancer is very 1950s. We've seen this in the movies. We've seen loved ones go through some pretty rough times. And the reality is, cancer care has improved. The side effects are not as horrendous. The successes of cancer care have improved. The safety of surgery in general has improved. Testing and detection of cancer has improved exponentially. But I also believe the rates of cancer, of rare cancers, have gone up exponentially in the same breath. And I am always cautious when we say the word cancer as if it's a single entity, is fraught with error. We just look at all the different types of cancers, blood cancers versus tumor cancers, when we look at organ specific, when we look at hormone specific, tissue specific, and each one of these types of cancers have, I'm writing down the word kava, I'll come back to that. Each one of these types of cancers require a different care and honestly have different outcomes, and some really crappy outcomes and others really good outcomes. And there is not enough research in the herbal realm on our effectiveness on it. Do I believe herbs can help dramatically with cancer? Heck yeah. What would I do if I got cancer tomorrow? I have no idea. I can BS everybody all day long. There are a number of cancers where, like, the research is there, 80% success, 5-year survivability, which means the cancer doesn't come back for 5 years and they don't track it after that. That's why it says that. I would probably do whatever that treatment was. If you gave me a 20 or 30% hope for survivability after 5 years, I would probably be challenged to go through all of that. So it's important that we don't imbue on our clients our own personal opinions about what is right or wrong, and to support them in whatever decisions they're making and not skew our education to be horribly biased, and to really come from a neutral place to benefit them the most, and look at the hard numbers. I have a number of people who don't see me for cancer care because they were like, what percentage of success rate do you have? And I'm like, I have no idea. Sometimes people are doing great, some people pass away, and that sucks. So I think it's important that we take each case on its face value of, let's get the knowledge that the oncologists can provide us with good information. They can tell us what type of cancer it is. Is it estrogen or progesterone sensitive, and so forth. And we can give them the client a list of questions to ask their oncologist. Things like what stage, and we look at early stage. It's encapsulated in a single location. Stage 1, and there's different ways. There's Gleason scores and all kinds of other cool stuff. But then there's stage 4. Now it's metastasized or spread out into different places, and the outcomes are much poorer for that. So one of the three, there's actually now 4 basic forms of care that Western medicine tends to take. Surgery, remove a tumor. And so once a tumor has metastasized through the body, removal of the tumor really doesn't do a whole heck of a lot of good, because there's only so much of the body we can remove before bad things happen. So surgery in a stage 1 or stage 2 is probably a good choice if it's possible. It's not always possible even at those early stages. The other thing is chemotherapy, where they literally go in and basically use poison in order to knock back the tumor or tumors in the body. That has crappy side effects. We see it is, they walk you up to a line, so your red and white blood cells tank, your hair falls out, you might be puking, you're exhausted, blah, 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 blah. All of that's really sucky. And the the reality is, does that also increase your risk of other cancers? Yep, it sure does. Can it fail? Yep. Can it cause organ failure? Sure. But it can also save your life. And they can tell you what percentage of success of saving your life is going to be there. Sometimes the outcomes aren't great, and they know they aren't great. A 20 or 30% success rate. So they know those answers, and you just have to ask. Radiation is the third, and that's a radiation increases your success of a cancer not coming back by, and these might be old statistics, but they're the ones that I have in my brain, 5 to 10%. The downside of radiation, I've actually seen more harm done by radiation than I have from chemo, oddly enough, is if you irradiate a particular area of the body, you can never do radiation treatments there again. So if you had breast cancer and you had the removal, you did chemo for a little while, and then they were like, well, we want to do X number, 50 treatments of radiation. If breast cancer were to come back there, you can't, radiation is taken off the table. You can't do it again. So I know a lot of people actually opt out of radiation, but again, what percentage of risk benefit is there? And the newer one, the new kid on the block, if you will, is the immunotherapies. And unfortunately, that's still kind of last case scenario. That's usually used in stage 3, stage 4, when everything else has failed. And has poor outcomes and is oftentimes just used to extend life rather than to preserve life. And those are fun terms that they use of like, oh, you'll get another 3 to 6 months, but the outcome is you're going to be dead. And it's kind of listed under chemotherapy, is when they're hormonally stimulated cancers. Then they'll also use hormone suppressors, and that's kind of listed. They usually call that chemo, but it's an offshoot of all of that. So nothing says we have to do any or all of those. And they don't mean that we can't do certain herbal things with those. And so one of the things I always tell my clients is ask hard questions of your oncologist. Always bring an advocate with you, because the second you hear the word cancer or malignancy or something, all you're going to hear is humming in the back of your head, because you won't remember anything else they say. You're just going to stare blankly and nod in a confused state. So somebody else needs to be there to take notes or record it in some way so that they can educate you when you've calmed down and had a sip of tea or coffee or something like that after the fact. I find that surgery is frequently, I will encourage surgery, but some people refuse that as well when it's an option. Chemotherapy, I base it on the numbers and what the expected outcome is. And there's not an easy answer, but there is a number that somebody's going to feel safe with, on numbers that they aren't. The biggest concern when people are going through chemo, well, I would say just getting through chemo, oddly enough, when I was like, what are your concerns about going through that treatment? What's keeping you up at night? And they're like, I don't want to lose my hair and look sick. So one of my favorite recommendations, the reason you're losing your hair is not because it's poison, it's because you're becoming anemic, and your body will preserve the vital organs by keeping all the blood here. And this is living stuff, right? And so the little venials and arterioles that nourish every one of your nerve roots, literally the body just goes, it's not that important, so it stops shunting blood there and it shunts it down to the rest of the body. So making a strong infusion, a tea of rosemary, and massaging that into your scalp at least once a day. I'm going to say about 80% of the time I get people to keep their hair. And if you miss one day, all your hair will fall out. So I actually tell people try to do it twice a day, and then if you only go to once a day, it's okay. The other thing is, because anemia, the red blood cells, platelets, and the white blood cells frequently tank, and if they go too low, they can't, they have to stop treatment. And so that means that the numbers they told you, if they have to change their approach, are no longer going to be accurate. that you're not going to get the same positive benefits that you anticipated if you have to stop for 3 or 4 weeks for you to recover from low red blood cells. So I find that reishi mushroom helps to preserve the red blood cells and platelets, and that the cordyceps mushrooms is helpful for preserving the white blood cells. And I literally tell my students, I tell my clients, every time you see those numbers go in the wrong direction, double whatever your dosage is you're taking. And there's no, how many mushrooms can you eat where it's a problem? If, like how many shiitake mushrooms are you going to eat before you have a problem? I'm sure there's a number, but I've never seen it because I really like mushrooms. I always make sure to print out material for the oncologist. I make sure they get in approval from their oncologist for that, and I've never had an oncologist balk at mushrooms. And so making sure that they are running that by there. There are lots of anti-cancer herbs. If you Google that, there's 1,000 products. Don't do those while you're doing chemotherapy. That is likely to negate the chemotherapy. I do not recommend going on extreme diets while you're going through chemotherapy. I've had people who juiced like in all of these liver cleanses and juices while they were going through chemotherapy. They had no side effects from the chemo. Their cancer came back in a year because what they did was they flushed out the chemotherapy, which means they did it for no reason. So eat food. Don't become vegan while you're going through chemotherapy. You will be challenged to make it through there. Nothing wrong with being it beforehand, but I find that most people cannot maintain a vegan diet whilst they're going through chemo. It's always a negotiation, but it is challenging. Let's just say that. We just want people to get through there successfully. The turkey tail would be fine. I would say mushrooms are great. They're always a winner. You're not going to hurt anybody with a mushroom. The other herbs I generally don't encourage. With radiation, if somebody chooses to go through that, there's changing beliefs in what's okay. Generally, the radiation oncologists don't want you to do antioxidants. That's everything, all healthy food is an antioxidant, but generally they only balk at pills. So they're concerned with extracted alkaloids and vitamins like vitamin C while you're going through there. I don't think the research supports what their belief system is there, but for the period of time you got to go through there, if you choose to do it, I'm like, whatever. The one thing I tell all of my clients as they're going through this thought process, they've acquired a diagnosis and they're gathering information. They haven't started any treatments yet. Is what I tell them is, here's the questions to ask, whether you go with me or go with another alternative practitioner, or whether you go mainstream medicine. Ask, what's the success? What's the expected outcome? Are we just extending life, or are we trying to cure this? Those are kind of questions we need to ask. And what I also tell them is, change your mind anytime you want. If you start alternative care and you get scared and you want to go to mainstream medicine, no shame in that. Like, I get it. If you start chemo and you're like, holy crap, I'm dying, I ain't doing this, then you come and, we'll address it as we go. So making sure people are able to change their mind and make valid choices without shame or fear. If they choose to not do mainstream medicine, I always recommend that they also, that sucks. Also, if they're going through this, Hashi's. Let me come back to that. Cordy. If they choose to not do mainstream medicine, what I always say is continue to do looking at marker compounds, like it might be a PSA or a CA125 or whatever. There's cancer androgens. They can continue to do PET scans or MRIs to look at tumor sizes and so forth. Set a line in the sand. You're allowed to move the line, but if you're like, if my markers, if my tumor size doesn't improve by X date, that the alternative care is not working, I'm going to do something different. I think it's fair to set an anticipated like red line that like, yeah, this isn't working. And that can be both from Western medicine as well as alternative medicine. Um, a lot of times I see people a month before they start chemo, in which case we can go all crazy with all the herbs and the anti-cancer, whatever your experience and training is in. There's no single one that's better or worse or whatever. Um, in the case of stage 4 cancer, uh, I would say a fair number of my people are in the scenario where they went through chemo, they went through maybe radiation, they did the surgery, they've gone through 3 different types of chemotherapy, and it's just starting to cause more and more harm, and they're getting more aggressive approaches. And they're no longer trying to cure the cancer, now they're trying to extend life, and usually not in a pretty way. Um, and they don't say, oh, you've got 6 months to live, but they frequently stop care, and say you should put your affairs in order, let me know if you need pain management. That's frequently what we see. Outcomes for any of us are iffy at best. That is always a challenging thing. Can we fix that? Yep, sometimes, sometimes not. I've got clients who have spent literally hundreds of thousands of dollars flying to Mexico, going to this, these guys are the masters, the best, they've secrets, blah, 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 blah. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Laetrile is not the cure for cancer. The peach pits and apricot pits, like, yeah, is there good research? Yeah, it's not going to cure all cancers. Does vitamin C IV at 100,000 milligrams every 10 seconds? Nope, that doesn't cure all the cancer either. Does it help some? Yes. So there isn't a single answer. And unfortunately, finances figures into this. Like, unless you happen to be independently wealthy, you have to sway that into the risk-benefit ratio. Being homeless is a risk, and that really sucks. And when people are desperate, they sometimes make decisions that are hard to come back from for that. So there are really good herbs, and I know I've got a few Chinese practitioners on here. Besides mushrooms, and mushrooms you ain't gonna hurt nobody with. One of my favorites is Bai Hua Shi Sao. Bai Hua Shi Sao is a Chinese herb that I really like for tumor cancers. There is a version of this, is the same genus, different species, that grows here wild in Florida. It's a weed, and I'm getting better at identifying it. I won't say I'm an expert yet, and I'm trying to find its bigger piles of it. I think once we get our summer rains, it'll be easier to find. Right now, even the weeds are hard to find. I really like that for tumor cancers. So Lee, this is the problem with internet and Google. Poke is not the cure for stage 4 cancer. Poke is specific for helping lymph and certain types of cancers. Holly is, both of those are toxic herbs that, do a little bit too much poke, you're going to be crapping yourself and potentially liver problems. Holly, the same thing. And so it's about matching an herbal formula to the individual, along with some of those historically or through research are for a specific type of cancer. So don't run to toxic, potentially life-threatening, deadly herbs for stage 4 cancer. Frequently, by the time we see them at stage 4, they're exhausted, depleted, anemic, barely able to eat. If you give them a deadly herb, they'll die. Like, not even a question, they'll be dead in a few weeks of giving them some of those. If they're alive, vibrant, consuming food, it matches in formulation. I do use those herbs rarely. They're just not called for very often. So treating what you see, not what the medical diagnosis is. Stage 4, there is no treatment for stage 4. There is a treatment for specific types of energetic disorders, and there's treatments for specific types of cancers. And so it's really important that we look at that. Yeah, Samaya, right on. So really important that we focus on that. I think it's criminal, all of the books and pitch people out there saying this herb is this drug. This herb is the same as doxycycline. It's better than doxycycline. This herb is the cure for cancer. Those are scam artists trying to take your money, and they're preying on people's fears. And it's criminal that what they're doing. So I wish herbal medicine was that easy. Just like Western medicine isn't easy, herbal medicine is hard too. And herbal medicine done wrong has side effects. And if we're using toxic herbs, which we do sometimes, the outcome can be organ failure and death in the same way that medications can. So it's really important that we are extremely well trained before we go grabbing hold of those. And the Western medicine has an impact, like knowing an estrogenic cancer, we have herbs that can affect that in a negative way, like something like some of our angelicas do have an effect on estrogenic cancers. Looking at diet and lifestyle can be a huge benefit, and it is one of the failures of mainstream medicine. They literally, their dietary advice from their registered dietitians is frequently, don't change your diet, just keep eating, whatever you do, just eat. And so they don't care if you're eating ice cream. And that's like laughable, and sure, we could get up a good rant, I'm sure everybody on here, but what's hilarious, one of my earlier cancer patients, like long time ago, like over 15 years ago, I think. Actually, I know it was over 15 years ago because she stopped in. Had stage 2 breast cancer, I think. It was an estrogen-sensitive breast cancer. And she did a lumpectomy. She chose not to do a mastectomy, I believe. And she did chemo and I believe did radiation. She worked through all of her treatments. And I was mostly doing acupuncture. I was giving her the mushrooms. And it was hilarious. I think I was like halfway through, 2/3 full through her chemo and radiation. I was like, we haven't talked about diet in a while. Like, how you doing with that? She was like, pretty good. My appetite's fine. And she was like, I was like, what kind of things are you eating? And she goes, well, right after my chemo infusions, I take the day off. She was a nurse. She takes the day off. And she was like, and on my way back, she lived in Sarasota, and she was like, I stopped at the Wing House and get wings and beer. She had done that through her entire, however many weeks or months, that she was still drinking alcohol, slamming back some good old deep fried chicken wings. And she stopped in probably about 3-4 years ago and said, just thought I'd let you know I'm still alive, and I just retired from nursing. And she was enjoying life and looked great and was healthy as a horse. So I was like, who the hell knows? Does that mean we should do that because that's the cure for cancer? No. I don't recommend wings and beer as a post-chemotherapy treatment. It's generally a poor idea. But, I also am not a fan of Ensure or any of the high fructose corn syrup laden things. So I do encourage healthier foods, low sugar foods as much as possible as we go through that, and just kind of meeting people where they're at with all of it. But that is one of the greatest challenges. All right, there's a couple of less heavy things. Let me do the fast one. Oh God, what time? Yeah, I'm doing okay on time. So I have not heard of issues with cordyceps and Hashimoto's. Doesn't mean there aren't any concerns with that, but literally I've never seen an issue. The concern might be the cordyceps is listed as an adaptogen, and Hashimoto's being an autoimmune disorder. There's concerns there, but I've literally I don't have any concerns with that whatsoever. Obviously, if somebody had an adverse reaction for any reason, don't do that. But yeah, that's rough. All right, the other one, so kava. And generically, we tend to put kava and kratom together in the same bucket, and they're very different plants. They just happen to come from the same general area of the world. And kava is generally a safe herb. Um, there is a top end to it, though. And so quality control with kava is an issue. If you don't know kava kava, although I just refuse to say it twice, even though it's classically called kava kava, it's Piper methysticum. I would argue the Piper orontan works the same, and if anything, is probably a little bit safer. It's just not the herb of commerce. Um, Back in the day when herbs had their renaissance, if you will, in the 60s and 70s, kava was one of those herbs that was like one of the miracles. Anxiety is certainly one of the driving issues for society. Um, Probably won't get to that one. Get me next month on that. That's not a short answer. Um, the so the what we had was there was lots of very ethical people in the herbal realm, but there's lots of unethical people because it's a quick way. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry any way you slice it. And so kava, we only use the roots. We don't use the aerial parts of kava. There are some kava lactones in the wrong proportions or wrong type of alkaloids in the aerial parts that have been linked to liver issues. Um, and we also find that long-term high dose kava, and when I say long-term high dose, I'm talking gallons a day, and we do see that in some of the in northern Australia. We see it in some of the South Pacific islands. In the same way, we see uh, drug addict, alcoholics, bordering on homeless, folks here who are dealing with dependency and addiction issues. That can happen with kava, and what we tend to see is kava is very drying, and so we see a lot of dry, cracking skin or skin rashes. We see constipation. Um, if it's mixed with other medications that are liver toxic, like Tylenol, if somebody's drinking excessively and kavaing excessively, that has the potential to cause some elevated liver enzymes. Um, I'm not a fan, and it's so funny. I just last night or this morning I was working on my presentation for this weekend, and I ended up reading a news release on kava, and they're now micronizing it, and so I don't like supersizing things. I don't think we should isolate alkaloids and concentrate them. I don't want a 200 to 1 extract. And so I like dirty herbs that have worked just the way they are for thousands of years. So I caution people about supersizing their products. If somebody's having 2 or 3 glasses of kava every day, um, I and it's just some ground up root powder made into a dirt water because it tastes like dirt. Um, Watch for the dryness. You can add something like marshmallow leaf or root to that. And so when I say dryness, it's drying the skin. It's not about dehydration. It's more the cool, energetic drying aspect. So watching for that dry stuff. And I would say get your annual blood work and make sure your liver enzymes are okay. And just know about the quality of the product you're getting, that they're from a trustworthy source. And Bob's personal opinion, don't get isolates or concentrates. We don't want a higher cavalactone count. And be cautious if you're doing other liver toxic things with it. It's generally thought that you should not drink and have kava in the same day. Doesn't mean like I'm going to have a glass of wine on Friday and a kava at the kava bar on Saturday. Nobody cares. You're not going to die from that. The It's funny. Although my running joke is there should be more kava parties as opposed to booze parties. Um, the I always joke it's a nice social lubricant. Like one or two glasses of wine is a social lubricant. It's social drinking, whatever, whether you love it or hate it. Um, but the more people drink, they get stupid. They put the lampshade on. They can't operate heavy machinery. I always say kava is sort of like having one or two glasses of wine without the stupid, without the lampshade. But when we start to look at those isolated compounds or those highly concentrated stuff, that's when we start to see the concern over operating heavy machinery. Like you probably shouldn't drive if you're doing isolated kava kava. Um, so yeah, I would say generally safe. Um, Kratom is a bigger concern, and let me back up a second. We tend to use two terms interchangeably. We use the term dependence and addiction kind of the same, and so you can get dependent on lots of things, and they can be used appropriately. You're just dependent on something for your function. Uh, Addiction is where you're actually going through withdrawal, where you get detrimental effects beyond just like pain or anxiety from something. And so I'm as guilty as anybody else of using those terms identically, even though they're very different animals, and I'm trying to get better about that personally. Um, so kava, I have not seen addiction, but I have seen dependence, that people have anxiety disorders and so forth. Um, it also is concerning with you'll see antidepressants, SSRIs and SNRIs, as part of the caution. I haven't seen issues with that. I'm sure it has a potential, but the MAOIs, more of your anti-anxiety and psych meds, it's not so much that you're going to like turn into a crazy face-eating Florida zombie person, but it's going to have a multiplying effect to it. So if your MAOIs are causing you to be drowsy and not safe to operate a vehicle and you take kava with it, you'll be more drowsy. If it's causing impotence, it will cause more impotence. If it's causing a drop in blood pressure, the kava will drop it further. So just being cautious when we're mixing that with prescription meds. It does affect the liver, and so it could change the excretion time through the liver, but it's usually very mild effects, and the biggest thing we see is the dry skin and constipation with it. Um, the other thing is, I'm sure we got some massage therapists on here. I think kava is a great thing to make a salve out of. It is a fat soluble. The alkaloids that we want are better in fat than they are in alcohol or water. And so you can infuse that in a massage oil and use that. It's specific for muscle spasms. So I think it's great topical, and very safe topically. I'm going to generically say kratom, some similar things, but there is 10% of people who will go through actual addiction and withdrawal from kratom. If somebody has struggled with opiate drugs, legal or illegal in the past, they will very likely end up with addiction issues with the kratom. It's also drying, so we get the same weird skin disease, dryness and cracking, rashes, as well as constipation with it. I would say actually the kratom's even drier than the kava, ever so much. There is so much, not adulteration, manipulation of kratom, where there's hundreds of alkaloids in it, but the two main alkaloids is mitragynine and 7-hydroxy-mitragynine. One, it gets you high and causes the addiction, and so we're finding some of the shittier companies out there are manipulating the alkaloid values to get you high. So you shouldn't be getting high off of kratom. You might get relaxed, But you shouldn't be like, whoa, dude. That's not the general effect of that. You should be puking if you get that. So they're creating a drug-like effect from it. And what I always say is like, stop screwing with a perfectly good plant and manipulating it. It's in the same way. Kratom and kava are not bad. The 7-hydroxymitragynine has an issue. In the same way, a coca plant has been used for thousands of years, a very safe plant, very beneficial for 1,000 different things. Cocaine, not so good for you. And so that's isolating an alkaloid, the cocaine, or any number of other alkaloids that you can put up your nose or smoke or whatever. That's where our issues are. And so whole plant medicine generally pretty safe. But I actually have on the YouTube channel, I have like a 2-hour lecture I did on kava and kratom a few years ago. You should be able to find that. It's still open to everybody. Um, and there was one other, Hashis and Cordy, we said that. I feel like I forgot one of these. I'm going to see where it is. Ba-ba-ba. Oh, I forget who asked me. They were waking up at around midnight, and at some point this just gets chicken scratchy that nobody can actually read it, including me. And really, their brain was turning on around midnight and getting that circular thinking. I'll take a more Western approach to this one. Um, the there are there's lots of different ways to look at sleep, and it could be something as simple as your dog or cat's getting up at midnight making a bunch of ruckus, so you need to treat the cat, not yourself. It could be that you're feeling overwhelmed in life and either looking at counseling or writing your crap down before you go to bed so that you're not waking up obsessing over it in the evening. But one of the common things, and I'm going to cheat and say Chinese things, but I'm going to recommend a Western herb with it. When we find that easy waking, where we startle easily, that is frequently a blood deficiency, and sounds like one of those stupid psychology tests. So blood deficiency may be anemia, but not all blood deficiencies are anemia. All anemias are blood deficiency. There, I think I said that right. Um, and so, I think blood work is warranted in a case like that. And so, making sure that somebody does not just a ferritin test, but does a full iron panel, so that they're doing ferritin, iron saturation. And they usually, if you get those, you get the TIBC, but those are important because too much iron is bad, just as not enough iron is bad. But also making sure that you get a B12 test. I think everybody ought to do that. Honestly, I think everybody should do both of those periodically, like every 5 years. I particularly like, there are different B12 tests. The MMA, the methylmalonic acid test, is theoretically more accurate than the one they usually order. And generically, different scales for the B12, but usually they're looking at around anything from 250 to 900 roughly is the range for B12. And I don't usually sweat it if somebody's over, at 1200. I'm like, whatever. It's a water soluble. You'll pee out your excess B12. Cut back a little bit. If you're actually clinically low, you need injections of B12. Like if you're at 200, like, oh my God, you're crippled, and serious damage is starting to happen to the body. But and this is my generic number, I had to pick a number out of a hat. If you're under 500 on your B12, I literally don't know how you get out of bed. I've been as low as like the 600 or 700, and I was dysfunctional. And part of that is I always say B complex is better than B12 by itself. You may need injections. You may need an isolated B12 supplement. But the question is, why are you B12 deficient? And so there's genetic reasons why that happens. It can be the MTHFR genes. It could be that you're eating vegan, and if you are vegan, please supplement with B complex or B12. I don't care what they say on all the websites, you can't get enough. You need a supplement of that. If you're vegetarian, you're probably getting enough if you're throwing some eggs or a fish or something in there. But it's also commonly everything from birth control to over-the-counter acid reflux meds all block your ability to absorb B12. Low stomach acid can come from long-term stress, can come from low B12. Any of your acid reflux meds, birth control meds, all interfere with your ability to absorb B12. So if you're on any prescription meds, chances are you're at least low in B12. That is a key component in pretty much every cycle and mechanism and product that's produced by our body. It's part of your mitochondria and so forth. And so although we store an amount in our liver, usually I find in 3 to 5 years, if we're not getting sufficient B12, we'll use up that supply and everything goes to hell. And so I'm finding that is a very common to find people in that 300 and 400 range when they're looking at chronic disease, chronic fatigue, things like that. So that is a good one to check out. Oh, sorry, that was the anemia. So B12 or iron. I was like, why am I saying this? I don't even know. So I'll spin that around. When we look at passion, passion vine, the leaf and flower of passion vine is very specific for circular thinking. And so for that, literally waking up in the middle of the night or obsessing, it turns into anxiety frequently when you're circling around like that. I will say off the and Lee, you mentioned stage 5 kidney failure. I don't know what your status is now on all of that, but looking at the minerals specific to that for dialysis and so forth, I've had a few people that I've worked on who are on dialysis, and I was shocked at the number of herbs that were very high in potassium. Before you try any herb, anything, really do your homework on that. Like it can get ugly fast. I'm sure you know. I don't need to tell you that. But things like mint can throw you under the bus if you're on dialysis. But passion flower would be the classic approach of just doing a tea of that. That does nice things. And I'm going to say, last one, Lee, MTHF are gene support herbs, not specific herbs, although there probably are a few that I could delve further into. Beets. I really like beets to help with the methylation of B12. And so leaf beet tops, beet greens, or the root. It can be in a crystallized form. It's one of the highest food sources of betaine that seems to be key to helping with that methylation of the B12. It's particularly good if you only have one gene turned off. If you have all of them, you might need a supplement like Methyl Protect. There's a couple of, like Pure makes one that's not called that. It's something else. That's one that's always stuck in my head. But most of those help a little bit. No, sorry, Samaya. Nettles, you can't use that generally if they're on dialysis. Way too mineralizing. Like literally looking at the, oh God, potassium and what's the other one? Whatever the other one is that they track specifically. Super pain in the butt to work with that. I'm pretty sure nettles is off the list because it's very high in potassium at the very least. All right, so I appreciate you all joining me. It looks like we had a great crowd here. Awesome questions from all of you. I'm sorry I didn't get to all of them, but I think I got to most of them. And if you don't know, Bob Linde, Acupuncture Herbal Therapy, Tradition School of Herbal Studies. Come by the clinic if you're in the area. Come to Student Clinic. Come see some of the phenomenal practitioners we got here. And I hope that you can join us. I will try to do this again next month. At some point, I'm sure I'll get tired of it. But you can also listen to the last probably 4 years of these on our YouTube page for Tradition School of Herbal Studies. So thank you all. And I'll see you next time if I don't see you sooner. Good night. Go have a great weekend.